Welcome to the Pindown, your Detroit Pistons podcast. I'm your host, Wes Davenport from Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys.
And I'm Blake Silverman, writer for Detroit Bad Boys, covering everything from the Pistons to the NBA draft and the Motor City Cruise.
Blake, man, it seems like you've had a pretty busy week, and obviously, all of us are following you out on Twitter. I hope that's at Blake Silverman. If you guys aren't, you really should be. He's doing great work, but it seems like you've been doing a lot of work there with the Cruise. How's that all been going, man?
Oh yeah, it's been going great. Thanks for asking. A little teaser for everyone who's with us. I'm doing a couple player features on some Cruise guys, some people you might know from the Pistons as well. So went to practice, did some of those interviews earlier this week, and then the Cruise actually played this morning. We're recording on Thursday evening, so they played at 11 a.m. So I was there for that as well. They weren't able to pull out the W, but they're coming right back on Saturday. So it was cool. All the two-way guys plus Stanley and Moody were active. So it was nice to watch them play again.
And they've been pretty successful this season, right? I mean, at the risk, I haven't been following too closely. So, full disclosure on that. But I think they've been having a solid season, right?
Yeah, so not to get too deep into it, but the G League splits their season into two parts, the showcase and then the regular season. They had a really good showcase season, qualified for that tournament. Now in their regular season, they're right around 500. We're getting towards the end of the year. So they're in a playoff hunt. So they're hoping to make that push and maybe they will. They're a good team. So they're fun to watch. Anyone who hasn't been paying attention, I'd recommend just flipping in and tuning into a game when you can. They're exciting.
And for all of our listeners here, as we're kind of shifting into the draft season, important to remember with G League players that the website for the stats, it does kind of split their showcase and then their regular season as well. So that's just something to note as you guys start stat hunting for all these NBA draft prospects that the Ignite have. So let's talk about some Pistons games, Blake. We had some controversial ones. I think we're going to skip over the Magic one, the Paolo Banchero game winner that they lost. A night immediately after, they also lost to the Knicks. And obviously the big story out of that game is the no call there as Dante DiVincenzo tackles, really good form tackle of Asar Thompson going after a loose ball. What were your thoughts kind of as that game wrapped up? What did you make of the call? I mean, it was a very chaotic 5 seconds of a possession too. So, what was your reaction as all that was going down, Blake?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a foul. It stinks that the game has to end that way. But I wasn't able to watch it live, so I rewatched it fairly recently, and the Pistons should have got possession of that ball before that whole thing even happened. So it was just a bummer. I mean, up and down game for some guys. Like Cade obviously balled out. The best thing for me in that game was seeing Quentin Grimes. I mean, obviously it was a revenge game from him, but seeing him play the way he did, not only knock down some threes, find some scoring in the fourth quarter, playing out of his mind, but the way he defended as well. I know there was some controversy between whether he should have been in or Jaden Ivey. I mean, I think Grimes closing that game was definitely the right call. So yeah, definitely a tough ending. Would have they could have pulled it out. So it would have been nice to see. But overall, one of my biggest takeaways from that game was just we saw from Quentin Grimes what we've been hoping to see.
Yeah, and it was really nice to see Quentin Grimes step up as Cade went cold, right? I mean, the first 3 quarters of that game, Cade Cunningham was by and large the only reason it was kind of competitive. I mean, it really fluctuated. There were times where they were down more than 10 multiple different points during the first 3 quarters, and I think even in the fourth when they had started to battle back. But then Quentin Grimes kind of caught fire. What do you have? 14 points in the fourth quarter, playing really good defense. I mean, that was everything you were wanting to see out of him since they acquired him at the deadline. I did want to make this comparison with the call because it reminded me of some Lions games in years past. So you can tell me if I'm a little bit crazy for this one, but if you remember, because you're a Lions fan too. So when the Lions, when they had Jim Caldwell and they weren't a great team, they'd get in these situations where, you know what, they played a poor game or even mostly a passable game, but they didn't play their best. They'd lose on the bad call, and fans would be really upset about the call instead of the fact that the team really didn't play a fantastic game of football for the entire 4 quarters. And and that really reminded me of what happened against the Knicks. Okay, because look, the Pistons, they were out rebounded. They gave up 15 offensive boards. One of them on the free throw there, like to end the game.
Mhm.
All right. They turned the ball over 17 times. And like I said earlier, they were down more than 10 points at multiple different spots during the game. Like, that's not winning basketball. Okay. They didn't play a great game by any stretch. And they aren't talented enough right now to win a lot of games when they don't play fantastic basketball. So like my thing is I just kinda didn't care about the call. That's not why they lost. They should have played better. Like, don't put yourself in the position to lose on a bad call. Play better. I am I crazy for that?
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I mean, the one thing that jumps out at me is the turnovers, and like 4 of those
Mhm.
17 turnovers were from Asar Thompson. Like, I mean, you can't really have that from not your primary or secondary ball handler. I know with his
Yep.
defense, he's making a lot of plays in transition, which lends to some turnovers, but really got to cut that down. Cade had 5. Like, I understand it. We want him to limit it, but like also you have 2 turnovers from Evan Fournier. So just like things like that. Like we've been talking about the past few weeks, just guys that like aren't your primary creators or high usage guys. Like we got to find a way to limit it as well. Also that New York game was when Cade picked up the tee from like arguing a call. So I don't blame him for
Yep.
that. Like he's been getting hosed like with how he's being officiated, but that's another thing. Like we want to tighten up as well. Again, don't blame Cade for that. I know those things are going to happen, but when you look towards it and there's like a close game, it's just some of those, I guess, mental things or just like mistakes, like lazy turnovers that really put you in that position.
And hey, since we're talking about controllables, I think this is gonna really transition well, into the Bulls game that they won. Hooray for that, that they did win. But on those free throws there at the end of the Knicks game, even after the call, Monty Williams, he had 3 timeouts. Like, you could go back and look, I believe he had 3 timeouts, and he did not sub in, a big lineup of just all rebounders to go down and be on the key to box out and get that board. Why would you not do that when you have that many timeouts? Do you have any other thoughts, or was that as confusing to you as it was to me?
No, that's fair, and especially like you brought up, like this is a team who's been getting beat on offensive rebounds on some that should like totally not
Then free throws
happen. Yeah, yeah. So I
repeatedly.
mean, yeah, when you have timeouts in your back pocket to sort of go offense defense, I think you definitely should. And yeah, like it's a game that's in New York in the Garden, like Jalen Brunson's on the floor. Like you know what's coming. You know whose side the crowd is on. So I think you need to do what you can to put yourself in the best position to have the ball in your hands with a chance to win the game. And I mean, I know, I guess in theory they should have done that, but there were other things that could have been done as well to get them the ball a little bit earlier too.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's just been my that was just my thing with that game, is like you get to the end of the game even after the call, the guy misses the free throws. Josh Hart misses the free throws, and you don't box out and get the rebound. Like, you could have subbed in a bunch of centers. You could have had Duran, Wiseman, and Muscala, who is still on the team. You could have all 3 of them in there. Just get all the 7-footers out there, get the rebound, call timeout, advance the ball, and go take a shot. Like, they even could have had a chance after the fact. So, like, the call's not why they lost. They lost because the Knicks were just better. They played better basketball, and the team made some bad mistakes. But enough of the negativity. Well, actually, some of this might get negative because we're probably going to talk about rotations. But let's talk about that Bulls win. They got one after three very very close games where you could make the argument that they should have gotten a win. They could have found a way to pull it out. They did against the Bulls. They held the Bulls to 95 points, which is pretty good just in terms of a team number. And Isaiah Stewart made his triumphant return from that suspension and injury that had been keeping him out for a while. So, what were some of your takeaways from the Bulls game, that win? And how about we talk about just a little bit of rotations? What you had thought about that as Stewart kind of got reintegrated into the lineup?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't totally surprised that Stewart was starting because it feels like whenever he's been around, like he's been in that starting role. I mean, we can agree with it, we cannot agree with it, but it seems like he's firmly a starter on this team. Now with like Simone Fontecchio and Quentin Grimes coming off your bench, I mean, I think personally I would lean towards starting Fontecchio, and he had that great game off the bench, 5 for 9 from three, 17 points. And I know there was reporting today from our beat writers that Monty came out and said that he's going to roll with this starting lineup and try to develop some synergy. So, I mean, I understand it. I guess I would like to see maybe a shooter in there for Asar Thompson. I think Fontecchio, like he's known as a 3-point shooter, but I think he's shown some tools outside of that that have been positive. Like he's been driving, he's been okay on defense. So I I would be happy if they tried to play him alongside Stewart and Duren, if that's like if Stewart's firmly going to be in the starting lineup. I know there's some talk about here around like Fontecchio's cap hold and him like starting a few more games results in a bigger cap hold. Unless I'm missing something, like that doesn't really matter to me because I feel like the plan is to keep him around anyway. Like he's gonna eat into that cap space. So
And it's a really tiny cap hold change. By the
yeah,
way, it's like 1.5 million to 2.5 million. So it's hardly it's change. It's pocket change.
exactly. So it like unless like I'm not a salary cap guru like our guy Kyle Metz, but unless I'm missing something, I don't see that as a reason for him not to start. So I hope they maybe change things up if things aren't going to plan. But also like the Bulls shot 2 for 29 from three in that game, which on the broadcast they brought up the stat was like the lowest percentage and however many like it was a crazy amount of time. That's a 6.9 3-point percentage. Like shots just weren't falling for them, which was crazy. I don't think any three happened in the game until Simone Fontecchio came into the game, like 3 minutes into the first quarter. So I think it was a little bit of them missing shots. Like I don't think it was a perfect game by any means, but I was happy for the guys to go out there and get one.
Yeah, let's talk about that historically bad shooting night from the Bulls here really quickly because look, guys, I mean the 95 points allowed, that looks amazing on paper. It really does. But the Bulls shoot a little over 35% from three as a team on the season so far. So like let's just go into like fantasy land here for a second and say that they shot a little over 34% as a team that night on their 29 attempts. Okay, just so I could get a round number. So they would have made 10 total threes instead of the two. That's eight more threes. And long story short, the final score would have been 113 to 105 Chicago, not Detroit. All right. If they had just made slightly less threes than they usually would have made. And it's not like these were all heavily contested shots. The Bulls were they something had their heel, all right? They just kept missing. They were missing open looks. So I don't want to say that the defense wasn't better because it was. I definitely think they looked a lot stronger, especially with Stewart out there on the floor. I think you noticed him as a rim protector off on the weak side. pretty frequently. He deterred quite a few shots. He looked great. All right. So he hasn't missed a step. So it was really nice to see Isaiah Stewart back. And it was an improved level of effort by the defense. I would especially call out late in the fourth quarter. Okay. That was probably their best stretch, at least in recent memory as a unit. But it's not like they're going to be giving up 95 points a night here as we finish up the season. Okay. And Asar, Stewart, and Duran is still just a nightmarish scenario for both Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey in terms of getting to the rim, which you did see. I kind of wanted your thoughts on the spacing because Cade really didn't get too many opportunities to finish at the rim, and Jaden Ivey really only got two in transition. Most of the time, offensive sets, at least when you were getting high screen and rolls, were sticking Asar and Stewart out in the corners, which led to the Bulls just leaving two defenders on both blocks. It wasn't great. Do you think that's going to be something that continues as long as we continue to see this lineup played? And it sounds like we will because Monty Williams really prioritizes the defense, at least per his quote today. I believe he gave it to our guy Amari Sankofa, but we can correct me if I'm wrong there. Well,
Yeah.
what's your thoughts on the spacing?
Yeah, I mean, I think just playing that lineup with two non-shooters, Jalen Duren and Asar. First, let me give credit to Asar though. He did make 2 threes in that Bulls game. But still, like he's not gonna get like really any attention on the 3-point line until that comes along. Stewart, he was throwing them up there. He made a couple as well, but he's not going to get the attention that someone like Simone Fontecchio would. So I think the spacing when you are running with that five will still make things harder for Cade and Ivy, like you said. Cade still got to the rim a bit, but it just made his life that much more difficult. And he put up like 13 shots the entire game. 5 of them were threes. He did get to the line a bit, which was great. But I just think in general, when you are trotting out that five with just minimal spacing, and I know we're prioritizing defense and Stewart really like invaluable on that, and like you can't speak enough towards what he does towards like what he does for the team defensively, but it does hinder like what we've seen really can unlock Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham. So I can only think it'll continue to be that way unless there's some like adjustments around who's playing around them.
All right, here's my question, and this one bothers me just a little bit, so I have to ask it to you. So obviously, it seems like there's an organizational focus on defense. Okay, that's great. I love it. Monty Williams, he keeps talking about defense. That's great. I love it. If there's so much focus on defense, why haven't we started Isaiah Stewart over Jalen Duren yet? Isaiah Stewart is a better three-point shooter. He's a better shot blocker. He's better at stealing the ball from the other team. He's honestly a more fundamental rebounder at the five position. I know he's undersized. I know he's not a lob threat, but all we're preaching is defense. So why can't you shift Stewart up, shift Duren to the bench, and bring another 3-and-D guy that you just acquired at the trade deadline specifically for this purpose, to have a guy that can shoot and play defense in either Fontecchio or Grimes. I'm not picky, and play them out of the wing with the SAR. Like if the focus is really that far onto defense, why haven't we done? Why haven't they done that yet?
Yeah, I mean, I have another thought, but is the easiest answer that it's size, like just playing too small if Duran's not on the floor?
I mean, maybe, but Duren, Isaiah Stewart's a far more effective defender at the five than Duren is right now, even given the size. And that's kind of my problem. Like I would rather start Duren at the five than Stewart because Duren's a better lob threat right now, and I would
Hmm.
really value that as a pick and roll partner with Cade. But like if we're purely talking defense, Jalen Duren is not a good defender as a big man. Isaiah Stewart is. So
Right. I think the other answer for why like if Stewart's always going to be in the starting lineup, Duren's going to be in it too. Like, I think it might also be Monty Williams' coaching style. Like, he's always used a more, I guess, I should say a five in an archetype similar to Duren. Like, I think that's what his system is sort of built for, having that kind of lob threat similar, and just like pick and roll partner, kind of like what DeAndre Ayton was in Phoenix. Their whatever their relationship was aside, like I think it might just be systematic. And those two guys, like what they bring, I guess, are both like one fits into Monty's system, and the other just like really elevates like the floor of the team defensively that we know that they're putting a priority on as well. So that would be my other thought after just saying like it's size related.
So here's my follow-up, because I want to make sure that it's clear. I am not advocating for the team to bench Jalen Duren. I think Jalen Duren
Say
should
it
continue
clearly.
starting throughout. Yeah, say it very clearly. I am not advocating for Jalen Duren off the bench. My point is, if we're gonna open things up to include, okay, we want a lob threat for Cade and Ivy, which I agree, we need a lob threat for Cade and Ivy. Okay, so it's not just all about defense, in which case maybe you need a three-point shooter out there other than Asar Thompson. Do you know what I mean? Like, it sounds like they're
Yeah.
so pigeonholed on defense, and yet they're not doing either thing that makes sense, and it's become baffling to me. I don't get it, and it does sound like this is what we're gonna get down the stretch of the season, barring any injuries, which we're not gonna hope for under any circumstances. So, yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, it is we like I feel like we're kind of just going through each one of the starting five and like finding a reason why, whether it's
Yeah,
something we agree with
we
or
are.
not, like that they're in there, and this just might be what it is. Like, I mean, hopefully the staggering and who comes in, like Simone Fontecchio played 21 minutes against the Bulls and scored 17 points in those minutes. I'd like to see those at least at 25. I know he's not as good of a defender as Stewart or Asar Thompson, but I mean, I just think you need to find more minutes for him as well because he brings exactly what the team needs, and it's why you traded for him.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, Fontecchio was a guy that was starting on a good Utah team as the 3-and-D wing. Like, of course, he ought to be starting here in Detroit, a team that is just absolutely lacking any 3-and-D wings, and also, by the way, has only won 9 games. Like, yeah, it seems a little weird. All right, let's dive into some of
Can
these
I say
questions.
one
Oh,
more
go ahead.
thing that
Yeah,
stood
go ahead.
out to me about totally unrelated about the Bulls Pistons game? I just wanted to say like one thing I noticed was I forget which play it was after. It was either like an Asar Thompson three. I think it was an Asar Thompson three that forced Billy Donovan to call a timeout. Shake Milton was like the first one off the Pistons bench and was like so pumped. And he was like a DNP coach's decision in that game. And I just thought that was really like incredible and nice to see from a guy who is coming from multiple good teams in Minnesota and Philadelphia, like probably not his ideal situation. And he's not even playing in Detroit. So, I mean, I just thought it was cool to have those veterans on the bench. Like, I think it'll do good for the team overall. And just wanted to give Shake a shout out because I really I love that. I feel like it's just invaluable in a locker room.
Yeah, I agree. It was really fun to see a lot of the bench was jumping up too. He was leading the charge. It was great,
They were like
and
standing
I'm
that whole
glad.
run. It was awesome.
Yeah, yeah, I'm really glad you brought this up though, because I had a bit of bad hosting that just happened. I had meant to open up with some Pistons news from Adrian Wojnarowski that Mike Muscala is being bought out by your Detroit Pistons. So This is why James Wiseman presumably had taken over from Muscala's spot here after the All-Star break. They were negotiating this contract buyout. What was your reaction to seeing that? And obviously, this is a little bit of a tough break. That Bagley and Livers trade that they made with Washington a couple months ago has now resulted in 0 players, which is just kind of a bummer.
Yeah, surprised a little bit. I guess not fully surprised after he wasn't playing. I mean, I feel like this was probably brought to the organization from Muscala and his camp, because when he came in, he was contributing immediately, and he filled a role that the team needs. Like I've been saying so many times, how nice it would be for the Pistons to have a big who can space the floor, shoot the three, and that's what Muscala was. I mean, I know like his timeline didn't really fit in with the organization, so I mean, it stinks to see. Like, I think he could have contributed and maybe even been retained to stay on the roster for the next year or two. But on the other side, like in terms of the whole trade, I know there was a bunch of discussion about why Muscala was brought out, which netted 0 players in this trade. Like, I feel like immediately, and Wes, shout out to you, Omari and Bryce and Keith Smith on the pin down. Like Keith Smith's immediate reaction to the trade was it was a salary dumping move
Yep.
for Detroit. They wanted to get off Bagley's money for next year. So like that was always the whole point of the trade to me. And Muscala contributing and like filling a role on the team was just like a benefit. I would have liked to see him stick around a little bit longer. I don't think it was as much of a Pistons decision. I think it was maybe like doing right for him a bit.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you just said there too, and I think what backs up this likely coming from Muscala's camp and not from Detroit's is if we remember, there were some rumors pretty quickly after the initial trade happened, that the Pistons were, considering keeping Muscala around. If one of the two stays, it's probably going to be Muscala into next season. Da 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 da. So honestly, it seems like he beat out Gallinari for a spot as the backup center. He also beat out Wiseman. He kinda showed that he's still got it, and I mean, hey, maybe a couple teams reached out to his agent's camp, said, "Hey, if you could get bought out, we'd be interested." And I mean, you can't blame the guy. He's over 30. He wants to make a run here at a title. I get it. It is just kind of a bummer that now they basically gave up a couple second round picks just to get rid of Bagley and Livers, which fair. I don't think either of those 2 had very high value, but at the same time, like you said, Muscala did really fill a good role here in Detroit, and it's a role that, while I will continue to wish that Isaiah Stewart would be allowed to fill it, they just otherwise don't have it on the roster. So this, on an upside, I suppose, means that you're gonna get to really see what James Wiseman's got here down the stretch run of the season. Let him prove it going into a contract year for him, and he has played well, in a few games. He's had some stinkers here and there as well, but, I mean, it hasn't been all bad with James Wiseman, especially as a rim protector. I think he's really stood out there.
Yeah, yep, 100%. And I mean, he is like a talented offensive player, and I know I forget. Oh man, this is like bad podcasting. I forget where I got the information from, but I know Wiseman said that he's still confident that he can be a good NBA player. I don't really know what that role looks like if he's ever like he needs to have longevity with that rim protection and defense if he's gonna be able to do that. But this is a guy that was the number 2 pick a few years ago because of that upside that front offices saw. So there's something in there. We've seen flashes of it, but it's really about longevity and consistency with him.
Yeah, and I do think for him, I mean, it's never totally out of the question, but, being a long-term starter somewhere it does feel unlikely at this point. I mean, he's coming to the end of his rookie contract. Right about now, for the most part, guys are kind of who they are at this point. But I will say if he can pretty consistently be a solid rim protector, he's big, he's got long arms, he can rebound, even though he doesn't have the best hands. Like even given his limitations, he could be a pretty solid backup big somewhere. I mean, I'm not going to say it should be in Detroit or it could be in Detroit. Who knows? Who knows about that? But if he does play some solid basketball here down the stretch, block some shots, catch some lobs, I definitely think it's a situation where he lands somewhere in a backup role. Like this is terrible to say, but I don't feel like this is a Killian Hayes equivalent situation. I think Wiseman's got a pretty solid path, and it's a pretty accessible path. So I'm rooting for the guy. I'm rooting for him.
Yeah, and I think with Wiseman, there's also so much overlap with his game and like what he can potentially be in the NBA with Marvin
Yep.
Bagley. And it's funny that they were on the same roster and they were both number 2 picks,
Yeah.
but Washington was willing to take his contract on and keep him in the building through next year. Like I think like he has a clear role in the NBA. He's already contributing and playing well over there in Washington. So I see a similar thing with Wiseman. Will it be here or not? I don't know. But it'll be interesting to find out.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, last thing on James Wiseman, there's no world that he's a restricted free agent this offseason. His cap hold is going to be quite large because he was a former number 2
Mhm.
overall pick. I cannot envision them ever picking that up to keep his restricted free agency, right? So, in all likelihood, he's an unrestricted free agent. He's going to have his run of the league. He can go wherever he wants. Hopefully, he can prove it. Hopefully, he can prove that he's a solid backup big here in Detroit, and we see what happens from there. But hey, as long as we're talking about centers, we got this pretty interesting question from @BasePistons on Twitter. So we put it up at the top. This is our pinnacle question, the first one. Compare Andre Drummond in his first 2 years and Jalen Duren in his first 2 years. Who's been better at this point? And now, to be clear, he wanted to add this context. Right, he didn't want us to just talk the numbers. He wanted us to talk more general impact. So we are going to talk some numbers, right? Because it's unavoidable. We'll bring it up. But generally, what do you think about the Drummond Duren comparison to this point in Drummond's career?
Yeah, I think the difference is really like defensively rim protection. I think context is a little important here as well. Like Drummond's year 2 was 2013-14 when it was like that Chauncey Billups came back to the Pistons and Josh Smith was on the roster. And I feel like it was like the year where everyone realized like what is the direction here. And I feel like the direction was really leaning into what Andre Drummond could be. Like he was almost the hub of everything, like offensively, defensively. Greg Monroe, I think, was still on the team, so he was still around in a similar role. But really, like the difference for me is that Drummond was a much better defender and rim protector at this point. And also like just the league in general at this point, I feel like isn't prioritizing or just like the traditional center. Like we saw what Drummond did on the glass, putbacks and scoring that way. And also like Duren's playing next to Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey, who are 2 lead guards that are really like the center of your franchise and are going to be scoring. And Duren is playing pretty exclusively in that pick and roll, like lob threat role. So again, like I would say in short that Drummond was better, but I just think I guess where the team he was playing in was more prioritizing him, and Duren obviously is part of this team's core, but he's not as much of like the core, I guess, if that makes sense. And it just helped that Drummond was a little bit better of a defender. And also, like, we've had a ton of conversation about Jalen Duren on this podcast for recent weeks and what we want to see out of him defensively. So I was thinking, like, and Wes, really want to know what you think about this. Do you think that we all collectively might be being a little hard on Jalen Duren, being that he's only in year two? He's battled through some injuries this year. He looked like a force those first few games when he went out with injury. And he's like the youngest year two player after being the youngest player in the NBA in his rookie season.
Honestly, I think if anything, we might be collectively being too soft. And this kind of comparison with Andre Drummond that we just did, I think it solidified that thought for me. It was really interesting looking back at Andre Drummond in his first two seasons and kind of having to throw out what he eventually became for Detroit and reset the clock a little bit and just look at what he did and what he was doing at that point. I mean, he was the same age, right? And I think everyone's hang up with Jalen Duren is on the defensive end. Okay, so if you look at Andre Drummond, his block percentage, he was at 4, and his steal percentage was at 2 his second season. Jalen Duren this year, block percentage is at 2.5, steal percentage is under 1. So just in terms of like defensive impact for another 20-year-old not that long ago for the Detroit Pistons, it was far higher for Andre Drummond than Jalen Duren. And I think that I think it's completely fair that that's the thing that worries most people, including myself, with Duren to this point. I mean, if you're a center that's not going to be, Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic on offense, you need to have a presence on defense. You need to be a good shot blocker. You need to be a good rim protector. You need to steal the ball. You need to make impact plays on that end of the floor. And he by and large doesn't. All right. And this is also where we're having this conversation in a year where two rookies are leading the league in blocks per game. They're 1 and 2 in Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren. So I'm not sure that youth is going to be a good excuse here for this specific critique. Just in the way that I also wouldn't use youth as an excuse for a young playmaker not averaging enough assists per game, right? I think I've brought this up on the podcast before, but it seems like if you're going to be a really great reader of the floor on offense and a really great playmaker for others, most of the time guys come in and they're pretty good at doing that right away. All right. Yeah, they'll turn the ball over more than they will later in their career, but they're going to be an impact player in getting other guys involved on offense. And I'm starting to think that that's just what the case is going to be for defense as well, right? If you're going to be in a really good defensive big, you need to be reading the floor because everything's out in front of you. You need to know, obviously, your pick and roll coverages, which can take some time. So some grace there. But in terms of blocking shots, getting steals, making an impact just as a free safety, for lack of a better comparison, I'm not really sure that's an age thing. I think that might just be a you have it or you don't. So yeah, I don't think it's too early to critique Duran on that. I think if anything, I wish more people were concerned about it because I think it could be a huge problem for him in his career.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And yeah, what like Big Cheese asked in the chat, like if we would rather have year two Drummond or year two Duran next to Cade. It's funny because I feel like Duran offensively fits what you want in a big next to Cade, but like we've been talking about with the defense, and Drummond could also be a lob threat. Like he was kind of like unstoppable for a few years at that point in Detroit. So I lean a bit toward Drummond on that one. And like also when we were looking up, I guess comparing their first 2 years, Drummond got most improved player votes in year two, which
Yeah.
is great. It kind of tells you like how the league valued a traditional big back then, and like how much things have changed in a fairly like short amount of time. But yeah, I think Drummond like kind of looked like he was gonna be a star. And I mean, we know how his time ended, but I think like you could have no qualms, I guess, with what he was doing in his first 2 years on both ends of the floor, on the glass, and everything like that.
Well, I think on offense too, we really need to distinguish between the two because Jalen Duren is actually now doing quite a bit of self-created stuff. I mean, they're using him a
Hmm.
little bit more as a hub, which even as a DHO guy, you really did not see a lot of that usage for Andre Drummond. Andre Drummond, his second year, he averaged 13 and a half points and 13.2 total rebounds. All right. Almost every single point was either a lob or a putback dunk.
Hmm.
He was not generating anything for himself. So, I mean, the fact that Jalen Duren is averaging 14 points this season with a faster pace, you probably would want to adjust that, right? It's not a one-to-one comparison just because of how the league has changed. But a lot of those points, or at least a good percentage of those points, have been generated by Jalen Duren. So, to Big Cheese's question, would I rather have Drummond or Duren at this point in year two? I would probably pick Drummond just because he's not taking the ball away from anybody else. That said, because Duren can do that currently, he does have a lot more potential on offense than Andre Drummond probably ever had. I mean, there's a reason he was the Dwight Howard comparison, right? Not a Bam Adebayo that you're now seeing get tossed around with Jalen Duren. So offensively, they're very different players, and I think we have to mention that.
Yeah, and I think the flip side to what Duran's doing offensively is we talked last week about him turning the ball over more than we want. He turned the ball over 5 times against Chicago. So like things like that too, like that part of his game is still developing. Like it's something that we've seen for the most part this year. So I don't want to knock him too much for that, but in those like you just don't want your 5 man to be turning the ball over 5 times a game. So got to clean that up too. But yeah, like you said, Duran can definitely make things happen in more ways than Drummond certainly could.
Real quick before we go on to the next question, this has nothing to do with the conversation. It was just something I thought was pretty insane to remember back to young Andre Drummond. Jalen Duren is a very good rebounder. He's an incredible athlete. He's averaging 12 rebounds per game this season. This season, he's averaging 3.3 offensive rebounds per game. That's pretty good for a big. Andre Drummond averaged 13.2 total rebounds his second year. 5.5 of those were offensive. That is nuts. That's insane. So
He was
just,
putting up
oh my god,
2020
I
games
can't remember
like
that.
fairly frequently. Like it was kind of
Yeah,
crazy. Like I mean, if the Pistons could have a guy like that, I mean, it definitely helps with what they're trying to do, even if Duran is more of, I guess, the offensive fit that makes sense next to Cade.
yeah, for sure. I just thought the offensive rebounds was
Yeah,
a
it's
nuts
nuts.
stat. I did not remember that. So that was kind of funny to see. So thank you, Base Pistons, for that question. That
Yeah,
was a
great
lot of fun.
question.
Let's go to another Twitter one here. This is from Matt Balouse. Will Monty Williams ever stop with the all bench units this season? Do you have good news?
Yeah, and first shout out to Matt. Matt's my guy. Thank you for joining and great question. With Monty, I'm kind of at a point where like I don't really like believe anything until I see it, I guess. I mean, he said that the starting unit that he ran against Chicago is something that we're going to see at least for the foreseeable future. We've continued to see all bench units, even though they've really like killed the game and took any momentum away from what the starters did. If but in the long haul, like if you have Simone Fontecchio in your bench unit, like hopefully he helps, and hopefully Grimes comes along too. Like we talked about, he had that good game or good fourth quarter scoring against New York, but his shot hasn't look good. It hasn't really dropped in anything else since he's been back. He's returning from injury. So hopefully that comes along too. I mean, yeah, like I don't know. Like I want to say I don't think we're gonna see the end of it because there's nothing that has told me really that we would. Do you think any differently?
No, I don't. I think the bench unit's gonna continue to get minutes as a five-man group the rest of the season. I kind of think at this point, Monty is just a little bit of like a gambling addict with this. Like, it usually doesn't work, but on that one game where it does work, it is really valuable to the Pistons, as it would be for any team. I mean, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, right? But like the whole idea with an all bench unit is generally your starting five are your best players, and those are the guys you want on the court together. So if you can have an all bench unit, they're all resting together, which means they get to play together more, right? That's a big advantage. Dwayne Casey used to do that in Toronto all the time. It was a huge, huge win for that team during their playoff runs. So Monty Williams is looking at it and probably saying, like, I want that. And truthfully, the bench unit that they have right now, if we assume that the starting lineup that we saw against the Bulls is going to continue, it actually looks pretty dang good, right? You got Marcus Sasser, Quentin Grimes, Troy Brown Jr., Simone Fontecchio, and James Wiseman. Like, I kind of like how that fits together quite a bit more than the starting five at this point. Like, that's a pretty good unit. Will they be really good as a bench unit and win those minutes when they're out there, especially as other teams and opposing coaches have figured out that Monty Williams tends to go to these bench units at the end of the first quarter and has started intentionally staggering their starters to play against those bench units, which is something I've noticed and hasn't been
Yep.
all that fun to watch. Yeah, I mean, probably not, but every now and then it might work, and that'll be the proof of concept, and that's why it'll continue. Yeah, he's rolling the dice, he's throwing it on red, and it'll hit. It'll hit eventually, just not every night.
Yeah, that was the same thought I had. Like you have other teams who do not do what Monty Williams is doing, and specifically they leave their star players in to play with the bench unit. Like we saw it against Milwaukee. Dame Lillard was playing against our all bench unit. Like New York does it with Brunson.
AD,
Like yeah, like Halliburton. Like you name it, it happens. So
yeah.
I think like we know how much of a concern defense is in the starting group. I think it has to, like, if you're going to do that, it has to be as big of a concern with the bench. I think Quentin Grimes helps with that. Like, he's looked great defensively, and we've only seen him for a handful of games. So hopefully he helps that second unit if we are going to be running with a true all bench unit for the rest of the season.
Yeah, and hey, quick shout out to Malachi Flynn, who's been playing pretty
Yep.
solid. I've been impressed with his minutes. Obviously, when Sasser comes back, Sasser should be getting those minutes. And on that note, I will say, if Fontecchio is going to stay on the bench, him and Marcus Sasser together getting minutes, that sounds pretty fun. I think that
Hmm.
that's a good two-man unit. That should be a good time. Let's go to this next question here from a fella in the DBB comments. He says, do you think the defense and the potential shooting that Isaiah Stewart brings to the table uh, is why Monty will allow him? I have to go back. I have to reread this. I got lost on this question. I'm really sorry, everybody. So, do you think the defense and potential shooting Stu brings to the table that Monty says allows them to get into the fast break is worth continuing to start him, or would you rather see Fontecchio start? So, if the choice is between Stewart and Fontecchio, who's your pick and why?
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally picking Fontecchio just because of the shooting and spacing issues that we've always harped on. I definitely get what Monty is saying. Like having a defensive player like Stu in there allows you to get out in transition into fast break, like that you're not seeing, I guess, as much of that from Simone Fontecchio. But the thing for me is like Asar Thompson with his defense, he is someone who gets you out into transition and can make things happen on the fast break. So I don't like ideally to me, if Stewart and Asar are in at the same time, like that should be happening more often than it is. And I feel like it's not. So because of that, and because like other concerns that we have, I would just start Fontecchio for the shooting and spacing that he brings, and hope that he's not like that. We just have to hope that he can stay afloat defensively.
Well, here's the calculation, Blake. All right, because you look at these and it's a trade off. All right, so you're going to look at Fontecchio versus Stewart, or even Fontecchio versus Asar Thompson. Is he so much worse a defender that the increases he gives you as a perimeter shooter and as a ball handler are not worth having, right? And I think we could all pretty confidently say that answer is no, he's not that much
Mhm.
worse of a defender. I mean, even just in his time in Detroit, let's throw out what he did in Utah, where he again was a very good 3 and D wing. Even in Detroit, he's been a pretty dang good perimeter defender. He's got length. He moves pretty well. He's fundamental. He stays in front. Like he doesn't wow you. He's not going to blow you away, but he's a good defender. He's a solid NBA defender, right? So it's not like there's some massive drop off here. You're not it's not like the Bojan and the Burks conversations we were having earlier on in the season. Like if you swapped Asar Thompson for Bojan Bogdanovic, yeah, you were getting a lot more shooting and scoring, but wow, were you giving up a lot on defense. If you swap out Asar Thompson on Fontecchio, like you're giving up some on defense, but not so much that it's not worth benching the 15% three-point shooter in favor of a guy that's still a good defender and also just happens to be almost 40% from 3 on good volume. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty easy answer, but obviously I'm on record for a while saying that it would be. So, well, what are your thoughts on that defensive trade-off that Fontecchio brings? Has he been as good of a defender as maybe I've thought? Am I wrong?
Yeah, I don't think like the risk reward with starting Stu over Fontecchio is that great. Like the thing with Fontecchio defensively, and this goes back to when we first traded for him. I kind of went to some like Utah Jazz articles and stuff to read more about him, and everything I read said as a defender, he's improved this year from what he was last year. This is his second year in the NBA. He's a bit older because he came from overseas. So, I mean, maybe his defensive skills are like a finished product, but I think there still might be some more room to grow there, especially because he's improved this season. And like I mentioned at the top of the podcast, like I've liked what I've seen from him outside of his 3-point shooting. I think he's shown some stuff that
Yeah.
while we thought there was upside that he could drive the ball, make things happen at the rim, play defense, I think we didn't really know for sure. And at the very least, we've already seen flashes of that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So let's get to this next one here from Rames in the DBB comments. Has Cade's recent dominance, he's on one heck of a 4 game stretch here, and has been playing really well since the All Star break generally. Has that recent dominance changed your outlook about his ceiling? It's a good question.
Yeah, I think my answer is kind of, which isn't a good answer, but I think over this like insane stretch, like these games that Cade's been putting up, like there have been games throughout his career where he has nights where he's putting shots up and you kind of know that they're dropping. And that's kind of been every game these past few games. There, we've wanted to see like improvement with him as a 3-point shooter since his rookie season. And he's like shooting great from 3 right now. So, yeah, I definitely think so. I think like one of the big questions for the team overall this year is Cade your guy? Like, can he be the centerpiece of a NBA playoff team or a team that contends for a championship? He's showing that he can be, and I think like at the very least, he's showing that he can have a ceiling as an all-star. Like, I think if the Pistons are halfway decent, he's an all-star right now. Which, I mean, I thought he could get to that before the season started, but I don't know if I knew that until I saw him this year. And I feel like now I know that Cade is definitely an all-star caliber player, which I maybe couldn't have said so before. So I think that definitely changes my ceiling a little bit on in a positive way. Are you thinking some of the same, or where are you at with that?
I don't think that this hot stretch has really changed what I think his ceiling is, but I'll also throw in that I've already been pretty high on him for most of the season, and even going back before that draft. I really haven't adjusted too much where I think he can go. So, I think the big thing for me, at least what stood out to me in what you were saying was, yeah, I don't want to get ahead of our skis yet when we're analyzing Cade. The question to me is not, can he be the centerpiece on a championship team? This team's nowhere close to that. It's not even, can he be the centerpiece of a playoff team, which honestly I think he's already answered yes, but even so, this team's not really close to that, right? The relevant question is, can Cade Cunningham be the centerpiece of a rebuild that turns out well? And I think that is a resounding yes. There's no questions left. That's the guy you should be building around. He's been showing us that pretty much all season. After he had that stretch with the really bad turnovers to start the year, he got that under control. And ever since then, he's been playing at about the same high level. And I think what's really been impressive to me, at least in this stretch, was the Bulls game. That was by far the most impressed I've been with his game since the All-Star break, and it was just because of the lack of space he had to operate. Like he played in a crowd. We mentioned it earlier. The Bulls were sending a second. They were sagging two guys down to the block all night. He was playing most of his minutes next to Asar and Stu and Duran. Like, it wasn't an ideal situation. And while that wasn't as bad as what we saw for him contextually at the beginning of the year with that Killian Hayes along with the Asar and Duran lineup, it still wasn't great. So he was forced to play in a crowd, and he beat the crowd. He beat everybody on the Bulls. Like, he didn't score, 40 points, but he got the ball moving. He was getting guys involved. He was getting to his spots, and he was really efficient when he got there. I think it was probably the most methodical that he has torn apart another team all season. And this isn't even the question. I just wanted to shout that out because he was incredible against the Chicago Bulls in that win. Incredible.
And also, like, those two games where he put up, what was it, like 56 points combined without shooting a free throw, like, and
Yeah.
he got to the line 7 times in the win against Chicago. So I don't know how much of him not getting to the line was his fault. So hopefully that comes along too. And, like, I mean, he's doing things that I mean, the centerpieces on contenders do. So yeah, I'm with you. Like, I see him as that, and hopefully, like, those things that we saw come up, like turnovers and going through stretches of not shooting at a high efficiency rate from three, like, maybe he is behind that. So yeah, I'm hopeful about what he can be in this league.
Just a quick follow-up question for you then, since we're on the subject. I mean, where do you think his ceiling is? I mean, I know you said you bumped it up just a little bit after the stretch, but what type of guy do you envision Kate Cunningham being one day?
Yeah, I always like, I don't know what, I know everyone like does the Luca thing with Cade, but I always kind of look to what like Jason Tatum is for the Celtics and kind of wonder if Cade can be the same thing. Like, they're not the exact same player, but just like that role for that team. I mean, Tatum has Jalen Brown alongside him as like a secondary scorer, and some nights can be a primary scorer, kind of like what Ivy is. So That's what I see. I mean, so I guess maybe in terms of that, like all-star starter at the very least. Like I think that's what you would say Jason Tatum is and can compete for championships at least. And I mean, he's looking like he can get over the hump at some point.
I love the player comps, not because they're accurate, but just because they're fun
I don't.
sometimes,
They're
you know?
not fun.
They're fun as long as you don't try to take anything away from them, which
Yeah.
I try not to do. But I'll just I've always saw as a little bit more Chauncey Billups to me as a point guard.
Okay.
I never saw the Luca thing either. But the question now is, does he want to continue being the leading shot getter on his teams as he develops? That's something I want to monitor over these next 3-4 years that he's with Detroit. Does he still want to be that 17, 18, 19 shot attempt guy, or does he want to drop that down, get everyone else involved, really,
Yeah.
really focus on that until you hit the fourth quarter? But we'll
Yeah.
see. Let's do one more. Let's do one more here before we get going. Um, this is from at by Matt Cohen. He asks, with as bad as this draft is expected to be, do you think the Pistons are better off trading out of their lottery selection for an established player or take their chances? And then who might they trade for? So let's assume for now, which it is actually a question mark now with the rate the Pistons are winning games. They could catch the Wizards. They could even catch the Spurs and the Hornets. But let's say for now that it's a top 5 pick. Do you think they might be better off trading out of that selection, or would you rather take a swing at a guy?
Yeah, and also shout out to this Matt as well. Also my guy. We cover the WNBA together. So thank you, Matt, for chiming in. Great question. I mean, if they can trade a top 5 pick for an established player that is the right fit, I think that is definitely a strong option in this draft. The trouble is, well, you never know like who is going to want to move up and who's going to want to put a package together to move up. But especially in this draft, that's fairly wide open. Like we don't know who is going to go number one for sure. Like we knew Wembenyama was going to go for sure last year and different guys in some other years. So teams may take chances on staying where they are to see if their guy falls to them. The question is if it's a team that's like a playoff team or back end of the lottery, do they want to trade up? And then who in the top 5 is going to do that? So I don't know. I feel like while the Pistons would be good, in my opinion, to trade out of a top 5 pick this year, I don't know if they'll really have the opportunity to do so. And second, if they were able to trade for an established player, I have one name. I've heard some others that like might make sense, but one that I was thinking of that I think would cause a lot of hysteria. So I'm really interested in what you have to say is Jeremy Grant. What do you think?
Ooh. I mean, I like obviously Jeremy Grant's a real good fit with this roster. He fits really nice next to Duran because he can shoot and he can block shots, two things that Duran struggles to do. So kind of covers up for him on that end, but also spaces for him to be a roller, short roll guy. So I really like that fit. I don't know if I give up a top 5 pick for him, Blake, at this point. And here, like I'm early. I'm really early in the draft stuff. You're light years ahead of me, I am sure. But my early impression is I don't think it's as bad as people are talking about. Even at the top. I mean, I know there's no Wembenyama. There's not a Cade Cunningham. There's no one of that caliber, but I mean, there are a couple guys that are contending for that first overall pick that I mean, they're not totally in a different ballpark. They're still very, very good
Yeah.
prospects. You know what I mean? And I think that's up and down in the top 5. Even you could probably expand that out to maybe a top 7 or 8. So I'm not sure that this draft is as bad as some people are talking about it right now. Obviously, that could change. People's opinions can change as we get closer. So that's obviously up in the air. But I will say, I think you made a really good point with there maybe just not being a partner for this type of trade because look, if the draft actually is perceived to be as bad as some people are talking about it, you're probably not getting a star player for a top 5 pick. They would probably just rather keep the star player, you know? So it always takes two to tango here. Either the pick is worth a guy who's an established star, an all-star caliber guy, in which case maybe you should be thinking twice about trading that pick in the first place,
Mhm.
or the pick isn't because the draft isn't viewed to be that strong. And well, now you don't have a choice. Now you're just taking the pick. So I'm not really sure if they're going to be better off trading out of it. I think what could get interesting is if they look at some of the guys that are in the top 5 and there is a little bit of overlap with Duran, Asar, and even a little bit of Jaden Ivey. And if they look at that and they go, well, maybe we trade one of those guys and keep the pick because one of those guys might be more valuable. I could see that. That could be interesting. That might get you a Jeremy Grant. I would also be hesitant to do that at this point, but it might. Um, I don't know. What do you think about the top 5 real quick before we close this out? Is it as bad as some people are talking about, or is there maybe some hidden talent in there?
No, I mean, I think there's a number of guys that are gonna be in the top 5 that you definitely, like, want on your basketball team. The interesting thing is I feel like that top 5 is much more fit dependent, and especially when you're comparing it against the teams who are going to be picking in that top 5, like, I think the only way the Pistons consider trading a pick, like, is if, let's say, we land at 1 or 2 in the lottery and Washington is picking right behind us. If Detroit or San Antonio is picking number 1 and Alex Sarr is on the board, like, he's just not a fit right now in my unless you're Detroit and you're considering moving on from Duran or whatever it might be. So I think there would have to be a team that would really like Alex Sarr that wants to jump in front of Washington to go and get him, because if Washington's at number 1, he might be the guy. But also the interesting debate is if you are trading a top 5 at worst pick, you're just letting go some of the upside that these guys have. Like, not a lot of them are proven prospects. Like, we don't know exactly what they're going to be in the NBA, but there's a ton of guys that have extreme upside that if you're trading this pick for a guy like, just for example, Jeremy Grant, who you know what he is, you're giving up that upside.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's all very good reasons to be skeptical about moving the pick or even moving one of the young core that the Pistons do currently have. Correct?
Yeah, and I feel like trading a top 5 pick doesn't really happen a ton in general. Because
Not often.
if you trade a number, let's just say 5 at worst, and let's just say number 5 is Cody Williams and he turns into an all-star, like, that's something a GM doesn't really want to take on the chin. So I don't know. I'm skeptical that it would happen, but it's interesting in this year of all years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you could count me as an early Cody Williams fan for what it's
Love
worth.
it.
You can count me in that pool. But man, Blake, this has been a great show. We went a little long today, so hopefully you guys listened through all of that and appreciated the extra couple minutes. This was a lot of fun. Thanks as always for everyone that tuned in and asked us these questions. Blake, take it away.
Yeah, special thanks to Sean Court, managing editor of Detroit Bad Boys, for supporting the show. And shout out to you guys for the great questions and talking points tonight. We'll catch you next week, whether on your commute or live with us here on YouTube. We can't wait to talk more Detroit basketball with you all.